This is Gemara Moed Katan Daf Zayin. Apologies for the lack of the video. We're still in transit. God willing, tomorrow everything should be back in order. We pick it up in the bottom of Chav Vav Amud Beis, 5 lines from the bottom. It says the Gemara Vein Ma'avrin Al Mitois Zekufai. Says the Gemara, when we're serving the meal, the first meal, the Sudas Havara as it's referred to, we do not serve it on a low bed, we serve it from a high bed. And this is referring to the person that gives the Suda should be sitting on a high bed, he himself, the one serving, not the Aval. The Aval sits on the low bed, the Aval sits on the floor. But the person serving the meal should be sitting on a high bed. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, 4 lines to the bottom of Chavav and Beis. Someone is going to visit Avel, and you're going at the time that they're serving the Sudas Havara, the first meal that they're serving the Avel. That says the Gemara that if he's Liba Gaspa, if he's very close to the Avel, he feels very intimately connected, he's a very close friend to him, then Yavru Al Mitais Kfuyos, then he should serve him from a low bed. V'im lav Yavru Al Mitais Kufais. And if not, he should serve him on a high bed. Because if he's very close, says Rashi, then we're afraid that it's going to not give the right type of feeling. You want the Avel to have a morning feeling, and therefore you're going to serve him from a low bed to bring the Avel down. Not bring him down, but he should feel the Avelos. Explains the Gemara story, 3 lines from the bottom. Abba Bar Marta, Davi Abba Menyumi, I skipped. 3 lines in the bottom. Rava Ismai Milsa. Rava, something happened to him, which refers to the fact that he became an Avel. Oligabe Abar Marsa. Abar Marsa came to visit. Avi Abar Menyumi. Rava Zakiv Abar Marsa coffee. So Rava was the Avel, and Rava put the bed straight for Abba Bar Marta to sit on. Abba Bar Marta, but when he came to visit him, what did he do? He flipped over the bed, he made it low. And it says, Rava, that he doesn't understand what to do, he's acting incorrectly. I purposely made the bed high for him because I'm in a low place. I don't need him to make me lower. And he went and he made it low, which is unnecessary. Tanu Rabbanan says in the last line, if someone is traveling, and a bit of a machlekes, if this means he's traveling and he becomes an Avel, or he's traveling while in Avelos, says the Gemara in the Tabuch of Zayin and Aleph, if he's able to minimize the business he is doing, he should do that. If he's not able to minimize it, what he should do is he should work with other people. He shouldn't do a business deal on his own. He should sort of, try to, swallow himself within other people and do business with them. Tanu Rabbanan says the Gemara, when do we flip over the bed, which is a way the Gemara is asking, when does the Avilos begin? Rav Elazar says when the dead body in the coffin leaves the house, that's when the mourning period begins. When they close the kaver, when they close the casket, when they finish the kavura, so the machlekes says, is it when they leave the house or when they finish the burial? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Gamliel Azakin of Zil Azakin was nifter. That once he left, the body left the house. Rabbi Elazar said, Rabbi Gamliel's family, turn over your bed. And then when the kavura finished, when the burial finished, the casket was closed. Rabbi Yeshua. So first Rabbi Elazar says, now Rabbi Yeshua says, flip over your bed. So Amr Loi, the family responding, we already flipped over our bed from the words of Rav Eli Yazer. And continuing with these halachas of the turning over the beds, which of course, back Mizman Chazal, bed was not a reference necessarily only the bed that was slept on, but rather a bed was even an entity that they sat on, which is more similar to that which we turn over our chairs. We sit on the floor, we sit on overturned chairs. Tanu Rabbanan says the Gemara, 8 lines down, when are we allowed to turn them back up? Meaning, when does the Levios finish? The other side of the story. Erev Shabbos and Erev Shabbos, min mincha l'mayla, after mincha. Now, which mincha we're referring to over here is a bit of a discussion in Taisvis, whether we're discussing Mincha Gedayla or Mincha Ketana, meaning something like 1:30 or something like 3:30 in the afternoon. That's a debate when the Avila stops on Shabbos. Amar Rabbi Barahuna, Abal Bikain, even still, even though you're allowed to turn it over as you're preparing for Shabbos, you still do not sit on that chair, on that upright bed, until Shabbos begins, until it gets dark. Let's say the Avila ends on Sunday, so you're only sitting for one day, still, you turn it back over. So Sunday morning, you sit down, you have the mixas yom kikulai, and then you go back, and then the Avilus concludes. Tanu Rabbana, it says the Gemara in the last in our line of Chavzayin and Aleph. When someone flips over the bed, he doesn't only flip over his own bed. He flips over all the beds in his house. You have 10 different beds in 10 different places. You flip them all over. And continues the Gemara that even if you have 5 brothers and one of the brothers was nifter, they all turn over their beds in all their houses. And now here we have an exception. But let's say we have a bed that is not used for sitting, a bed that is not used for sleeping, but a bed that is used particularly and primarily for kelim, for utensils. You do not need to turn over such a bed. The reason being, the Mefarshim explained that such a bed doesn't have a din of a bed. It's not a place that you sit on. It's more of a holding ground for items. You don't have to flip it over. And says the Gemara 4 lines into the wide lines, Dargosh, which is a type of bed, as the Gemara will explain in a moment, you do not have to turn it over. Rather you stand it up. Dargish Matas Karbitov says in Shimon Gamliel, what do you do with this Dargish type of bed? As again, we'll see in 1 minute what it is. What do you untie the loops? There was the loops to the bed frame. You can untie those loops so that the mattress, which wasn't a mattress, as we'll see, was more like a leather sheet instead of a mattress, instead of a box frame. So you untie the loops and let it fall on its own. So my Dargish, as we just explained, Amar Ula explained Arsa the Gado is a bed of good fortune. And Rashi explains it's a bed they didn't sit on. They just believed that by leaving an empty bed in their house, that was a sign for a good omen, a good mazel. And again, the Mefarshim explained, is this kishuf? Is this, what exactly was this? But obviously, if the Gemara is talking about it, it was allowed. Amrli Rabba l'mi'atek habi melech. As the Rabba, when it comes to a king, the Tanakh we learned in the Mishnah, Kolam is Tuban al-Aretz, everyone sits on the floor, and the king sits on this dargish type bed, which you just explained was a bed that no one ever sat on. Ask the Gemara, can it be that until now no one sat on this bed, and now when the king is in Ovel, now he's going to sit on it? Ask the Gemara, that makes no sense. Says the Gemara back, really? It makes no sense. Maskal Ravashi. Ravashi asks, and of course he's asking a question on a question, which is essentially an answer. Asks Ravashi, my kusha, what's your problem? Just like we find by eating and drinking. Until now, do you feed the king from the food of a mere mortal, of a mere peasant? Absolutely not. But when he's in Avel, we give the king food and drink, and therefore says the Gemara, just like when the king's in Avel, we feed him and eats from our food, so too the king will sit on this dargish bed. Eli Kasha says the Gemara, you have a problem? I'll tell you what your problem is. About 10 lines into the wide lines, first one of the line is Kasha, Titania or Titanan, dargish ain't zarech lechapaisa. You do not have to flip it over, you stand it up. And if you're going to tell me it's an arsa digada, this bed that no one ever sits on, why do you not have to flip it over? You don't only turn over your own bed. You have to turn over all the beds in your house. So says the Gemara, if something's bothering you about this dargish, you know what should be bothering you. It should be bothering you, then why do you have to flip it over? Why do you not flip it over? You have to flip over all the beds in your house. Says the Gemara, that's not a question. My kasha midavi amita hamyuchades lekelim. Just like a bed that is designated and specific for utensils, Titania, and my samitas hamyuchades lekelim means then you do not have to turn it over. So the Gemara is bothered trying to figure out what was the issue with this dargish. Alikasha kasha tries the Gemara again. This was the question. Rashba Gaimer says of Shimon Gamliel dargish amatir karbita v'unav meilov. You untie the loops that are tied to this frame, this leather mat that's tied onto the bed frame, you entirely let it fall. My garbitan is like, that was your question. The desires of the gods of this bed of good fortune did not generally have any loops. It's like a regular bed which doesn't have a loop. So explains the Gemara, you know what's going on over here? If the Chlifa was one who used to go to the leather market, and therefore my Darga, she would explain, Arsa Titzila, a bed of leather, and that's what it's referring to over there. And then we have no questions. It's Marnami Amar Rav Yirmiyah Dargish Sirugav. Of two different types of bed. A dargush, you have the loops going through the frame, and the mita, the loops are on top of the frame. Amar Rav Yaakov Barachav, Amar Rav Yeshua ben Levi. What's the halacha? Rav Shimon Gamliel, like we just said, it's Marnami very similarly. Amar Rav Yaakov Barachav, Amar Rav Yasi mita shenakalite yoitzim, a bed that the posts protrude, that has some sort of canopy bed. That's referring to zoik fin v'dayoy. You stand it up and that's enough. If you have this type of bed with a wooden frame with a canopy, all you have to do, since there's only two poles at the end, we have to do is it's not going to stand up properly, and therefore you just, sort of lean it on one side. And those are the halachas of different types of bed that you're going to turn over, and concludes this piece of Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan. We're about 7 lines in the Mishnah. The first one line is Rabbanan. Yoshin al gabe kisei al gabe yodaina gedayla. If someone sits, as we mentioned before, but not sits, he sleeps instead of on a bed, on a chair, al gabe udaina, or he slept on a martyr, gedayla mizu al gabe karkor, even if he slept on the ground, he does not fulfill his obligation. And when would he absolutely fulfill it? He didn't do this act of Kfiyas Hamita, which is part of the necessity, that even though he's sleeping in an area which is not necessarily comfortable, he's on the floor, he's in a chair, etc., you still have to do an action. There's a special din and a special halacha to actually turn over the bed, which again we said we fulfill nowadays with turning over the chairs, but that itself is a critical ingredient in the form of mourning necessary. What are you allowed to do in the house of the mourning? You're allowed to be machabdin, you're allowed to sweep, marbitzin, you're allowed to sprinkle water. Again, the dust floors lets the dust settle, and you're allowed to wash the dishes, the plates, the cups, the jars, the bottles. What are you not allowed to do? Mugmar was a type of incense to make the house smell good. Some different type of spices. You're not allowed to bring that lebeisa avel. But the reason is because back then they used to do these practices, which was a taiva and a tainig, and it was a way of enjoying in an avel. Should not be in a situation of enjoying. Eini asked the Gemara, we don't make a bracha on these items in the Beis Havel. What's the obvious implication? That it sounds like you're allowed to bring them. Explains the Gemara, like Kasha Beis Havel, ha Beis Havenachamin. 2 different things. The house where the nifter was nifter. The room of the nifter itself, there it's being brought more for the tainig, whereas in the Beis Menachamim, where the room of the consolers, those are coming to visit, that is a different story. And we continue on the bottom of Chav Zayin and Aleph for the new Mishnah. Says the Mishnah in Malichan Beis Havel lo b'tavla lo suchtav lo b'kinon elo v'salim. When you're bringing the food, the Sudas Havara, which we began talking about today, you do not bring it on a tavla, a tray, a usklama, a bowl, a kinon, a basket. Ella b'salim, rather a simple and ordinary basket, as the Gemara will explain the reason for these takanas. You don't say the Berch Avelim on the Chalamayid, Avlaim the Meshura, Umenachamin, but you do stand in a row and you menachem the Avel, you console and comfort him. Upaitin is a rabbim, and via that, we let everyone go home, and that's the end of the Levaya. A menachem is Amita Berchaiv, but Shaloi Lahargalas, but you don't leave the dead body in the middle of the street, which they normally would have done in order to increase the crying and the connection. Do not do that on Cholamayv, Lo Shal Nashim, Lo They are covered, never do that for the woman, due to the appropriate honor befitting a Bas Yisrael. And continues the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, discussing the Sudas Avara, the food brought to the Aval. Originally, they would bring baskets, wealthy would bring baskets of silver and gold, and even the poor, they would bring it in a basket of twigs, kalufa that was peeled. But Aniyim felt terrible about what was going on. His kinu, they made it to country called Meviim, but Salin Nesarin Shalarava, Kalufa, Neshikava, Neviim, everyone should bring it in these very simple baskets for the honor of the Neviim, and of the Aniyim, excuse me. Tanarabanan, Barishaina, 4 lines to the bottom, Ayamashkim Zaval Asirin. Ashirim is chuchas lavana. The wealthy would feed drinks in the base avel in chuchas lavana on white glass. Vaniyim is chuchas sevua on colored glass. Vayaniyim is vaishin. So Aniyim would feel bad that they weren't able to serve in the same way as the Ashirim. His kinu sheikol mashkim is chuchas sevua. We see the incredible sensitivity to have towards a person, the mere fact that he doesn't feel as good, that he doesn't have the same level of wealth, even at this time of mourning, we take into consideration. Originally, interesting practice that we know nowadays is more of a not Jewish practice. What they would do, they would reveal the face of the nifter, you'd be able to see by the kvura, by the burial, but the aniyim you would not. But the reason being that the aniyim's faces were emaciated and darkened from their famine. By aniyim is baishim, and the aniyim felt bad that their faces aren't being revealed at the time of their kvura. So you do it for everyone, so the aniyim have their appropriate honor. Continuing these items that changed from originally till now. Ashirim and dargish, the aniyim bring the food in as we turn over to Chavzayin with base. They were bringing a kaliya, which is a type of beer, a type of coffin. Vayaniyim is baishin is kinu she'akol moitzihen. Bekliva, very simple and cheap type of coffin. Make fayda shel aniyim. And Bereishayna, we continue on Chavzayin with base, the third line on this list of items in which we find one entity is more stringent and machman than the other. Originally, they would bring mugmar, these senses that smelled good, under one who was nifter with an intestinal ishtu, but mesim. But the people that are alive with the same exact malady, with the same exact health concern, they felt bad. They felt that look what they're doing to these people with this disease. We want everyone to feel good, even those who are going through troubling and difficult times. So they changed the entire dynamic in order to ensure that no one gets at least a bit hurt. Originally they would do tefillah as Caleb on a zav who was nifter. They would immerse the kelim before they would nifter. They wanted to make sure they left over everything. But the other woman who actually needed, they were bleeding, they felt bad. So everyone should have this din of tefillah. So everyone has the appropriate dignity. So everyone that became the minhag, that everyone titled their kalim before they were nifter. Originally they do tefillah on a zav that was nifter. And they you got to do it for everyone. Do it to their honor. Continuing the same thing, the first white line, the burial was very difficult for the family. It was so costly. Even more than the death itself, it was more bitter when they found out what it would cost them. So you know what they would do? The Krivim, the relatives, would leave them, would leave the dead body on the street. They wouldn't deal with it. What that means, he gave them a tzivur, whether that means he told them what to do, but he did for himself his own burial. He did a much lower standard. We have to be klipishin, regular linen garments, and that is what everyone took on to go out and klipishin. Says Rav Papa, nowadays, you know what we could do? We could give everyone a Zazar Tzuva one zuz, and that would suffice. Says the Gemara, "In manichan es amita berachai." We don't leave the mita, we don't leave the dead body in the middle of the street. And chol hamayid explains the Gemara 5 lines into the wide lines of Chavzayin of a base. Amar Rabba in ma'id neitam l'chacham. There's no chol hamayid in front in deference to the Chambal Purim. And certainly, when it comes to Chanukah Purim, we let the Speedim happen. This is only in front of the Aroin, but Shaloi B'fanav, then you can't have a Speedim anymore. Aini asked the Gemara, but Rav Kahana Sifdayo Rav Zvin ben Ardoi. Rav Kahana, what did he do? He gave a hesped on Rav Zid from Ardoi B'Pom Nahara, in the city of Pom Nahara Cholamayit. So Amar Rabbi, so says Rabbi, Yom Shmuav, it wasn't Stam that she spoke that way. It was the day that they heard about the Nifter who been in front of Dami. It was as if the body was in front of them, and that's why she utilized the moment to say a hesped. Amar Ula, about 10 lines into the wide lines. First line is Hava. Hesped Aleif. Says Ula, the word that has been mentioned in the Chumash is referred to beating and hitting the chest. Shadayim Seiftim, it says in the breast they're going to beat, referring to the act of vidoy that one is going to say, that he's going to hit himself by the Sveidim. Tipuch, when it talks about tipuach, another type of form of ways that they would act during the eulogy, during the hesped, bikabayim biyad, that refers to doing with their hands, clapping hands together. Kilos, what does that refer to? Berego, with the foot. So 3 different ways that they would mourn, hitting themselves and clapping and using their feet, etc. Tanarab Hanan explains the Gemara, Makalos Leikalos B'Sandal. If you're going to stamp your feet, don't do it while wearing a sandal. Why not aluminum? Because the sandal could spin and turn and hurt someone's foot. When it comes, an Avel, once he turns his head, once he shows that he received an Achama, you shouldn't sit next to him anymore. You see that he took it all in, then you leave him to his own himself. Everyone stands for Nasi, to everyone, Lakol Aimrim Lahem Shavu Chutz Meicho Me'avel V'Chayla. We tell everyone to go back, except for the Avel and the Chayla. They're allowed to give the proper honor to our Rav Yechanan. Amar Rav Yehuda, says Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Avel Yemrishan Asa Lechel Lechem Mishaloi. Not only is it like a nice thing that we bring the Avel food on day one, he's not allowed to eat food from his own house. We know this from the fact that Hashem told Yechezkel, do not eat the bread of food, which means that a regular mourner does eat the bread of other people, lachem anoshim, and not his own lachem. Rabbi Rav Yosef the way that they dealt with this issue, whenever one of them was an avel, they would give food to each other, so both families would have what to eat. No one is allowed to work. Ravuna came to visit a place called the Rumta. Shama called Shibura. He heard the sound of a shayfer, the shachva, that someone was nifter. So people went and they saw people working. That what's going on over here? Bishamta. How can you work if there was just someone who was nifter? Lo shachav in ika bimasa. Amrulech Chavrusa Ika ben Masa, you are Chavrusa to Hashem. What's going on over here? Amrlo Yachi Sharia. So Rav Amnuna responded to them: if it's true, then you're not in Chayrim anymore. Sharia lechuv. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav Kol Miskasha Al Meisa Yoiser Midai. Now, not only do we just learn the halachas of what's the proper way to give kavod, but let's say someone is uncontrollable and can't get to themselves. Al Meis Acher Ubaycha, says the Gemara, it's going to cause. You're going to come to cry for another mace. And explains the Gemara, so there was a woman that was in the community of Ravuna. Havale Shivas Bani Mace. She had 7 children that were nifter. Chamine Havas Kabachi Biserta. And one of the sons was crying excessively for that which he lost. Don't do this. Don't listen. If you listen, okay. Explains Kulu. That's basically, it's not such a good story that if you don't listen. So he said, go and see for yourself. Go and see. Explains the Gemara, do not weep excessively. Why And you shouldn't do anything more than the appropriate measure that you're required to do. The first 3 days is intense mourning for crying. The gives the you can't give haircuts, etc. of the 30 days. From 30 days and onward, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yatem Rachamin B'al Yoser Mimenu, you can't be more Rachmanis than me, and therefore that is the amount of time that you have to mourn. And Amar Rav Yehuda, finishing up today's daf, Banim, says Rav Yehuda, this is referring to in the passage, one who cries and leaves, referring to someone who's nifter without who leaves without any children. Rav Yehoshua comes in Rav Yeshua ben Levi and he says, the only one that should go to the Beis Abel is one who is nifter without any children. As the pasuk says, you're going to cry bitterly and intensely for those that leave. They're not coming back. We see the land of the birthplace. And concluding the Gemara of Huna Amar, how does he explain these passages? The famous Rav Huna, Damar Rav Huna, 5 lines on the bottom. You do Avera 2 times. Comes the mutter. Comes the mutter. It's as if that's the feeling that you have after doing an Avera 2 times. If you have to view as if there's a sword sitting between your shoulders. 3 to 7 how important we have to be at each stage to say on top of everything. We'll pick it up in the last line the next year. And